Hey, it's Ben here, and here in this video I wanted to talk about how we set up a new piece of work in Final Cut Pro. Now, essentially what we're going to be talking about is our libraries and how we set those up so that it makes things easier to manage as we're continuing to work on different projects or different pieces of work in Final Cut Pro. Now, the hierarchy of how things are set up in Final Cut Pro is quite simple. Essentially, we have our library, which is our main file that we set up when we have a new piece of work. So you can see here on the top left, I have libraries for different pieces of work that I'm currently doing. So I have a music video edit that I'm working on. I have a wedding edit that I'm working on, and then promo for a local grocery store, and then a promo for a water polo club that I'm working on as well. So each of these little icons with 4 squares is our library. Now, if we right click on one of these and reveal it in the Finder, you can see where those libraries are saved is by default in the movies folder on your computer. Now you can set that up so that you can save those on an external hard drive, which is something I would recommend, but by default this is where they'll be located. And the reason for setting each piece of work up as a separate library is really, in my view, a way that you're going to make things easier to manage as you continue to work on different projects, some big, some small, in Final Cut Pro. So what you can see here is each of those libraries creates this icon. Actually, we'll just go to our view here and view them as icons. So you can see these little purple icons with 4 stars in them are our Final Cut Pro libraries. So essentially we have one for each of those different pieces of work that we're creating here. So if we come back, the first thing we'll do when we create a new piece of work is to go to File, New, and Library. So essentially here we're going to set this up in the movies folder. We'll call this new library Final Cut Pro Intro, and then we'll save that. So now you can see we have a completely blank library which has its own smart collections, its own event, and we can use some of these organizational features a little later on as we get more used to Final Cut Pro. But the nice thing here you can see is that when we've created that new library, it means we can right click on each of these existing open libraries and close them. So we're going to close the library music video. We can right click here, close this library, right click here, close this library, and then we'll right click here again and close this library. So now we're starting again from scratch. We'll see no timeline here. We won't see a timeline or a project timeline until we hit new project. We'll set up a 4K project. Click OK. And now as we begin to import footage, we'll see it up in our library and our events on the top left. So as you import footage, either by dragging it in or by going to File and Import to import media from a camera or your phone. So essentially this is the kind of key thing. So if we need to open up those old pieces of work, the libraries that we've closed, then the first thing we can do is go to File and Open Library, and you can see all these different libraries listed here. So we can go to the grocery store one, and you can see everything's intact. If we set up any timelines in there, then they will be in there. Now, this is where a little bit of confusion can happen. So we've got this new edit timeline down here, which is part of our Final Cut Pro intro library. So if I come to this Green's Local Groceries library, I'm going to go to File, New Project. It's going to create my new project timeline. We'll call this Grocery Edit version 01. And now you can see we've got that project in there. Okay, so in our Final Cut Pro intro we have our new edit timeline, and then in our Green's Groceries we have our Groceries Edit version 1. So we can have more than one library open, and that's one reason why I'd recommend when you're beginning to work in Final Cut Pro, just making sure that if you do see more than one library open, just right click on the library that you're not working on and close it. So we'll just keep the grocery store one open here. So now you can see it's just this Grocery Edit version 1 that's open, and we can begin to drag clips down to our timeline here. So this will hopefully help to simplify your workflow in Final Cut Pro. We can also open those libraries from our Finder as well. So in the movies folder, you can see we can double click on one of these two to open it up in Final Cut Pro. Now, the other interesting thing about libraries, which will take a bit of getting used to as well, is you don't need to save them. So as you're working on your edits in Final Cut Pro, you'll notice there's no File, Save option. There's a Close option to close the library, but essentially Final Cut Pro is continually saving each of your individual edits as you're working through. If you make a mistake, you can go to File, Open Library, and Open from Backup. And Final Cut Pro will create a timed backup for different libraries. So you can see here, even though I've only had this library open for a short while, it's got a couple of different revisions from those edits that I've done in Final Cut Pro. So I'll cancel that for the moment. And those backups are stored in my Movies folder. And you can see if I double click into my Final Cut Pro backups, then I have a long list of different libraries and their backups in this folder. So I hope that's a useful overview of how to begin a new piece of work in Final Cut Pro using the library setup. And really the hierarchy for these is that you would have one library that contains all your media, which can include video, sound, any graphics like logos or other overlay graphics that you're working with. And then you'll have those project timelines within that library. So if you want to create a new grocery store edit, so maybe we're doing a new square edit, we can go to File, New Project. We'll call this Square Grocery for Instagram. And you can see here we can set up our square edit, click OK, and now we have two edit timelines. We'll just quickly drop a clip down here. You can see we have our square video set up there, and we can get our clip to fill that space. So again, two project timelines in here in our library, but one library containing all that footage and all those different project edits. If you have any questions about library setup and projects, then do leave them in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.